Pennsylvania. With me is Josh. He's one of the employees here at the museum. He was kind enough to take some time out of his day to do a little tour and interview for us. So there's some pretty cool stuff here we're going to see as we go along. I'll let Josh kind of give an introduction of himself so you know where he's coming from.
So yes, hello, my name is Josh Roth. I am the site administrator at the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum here in Potter County, Pennsylvania. We are one of the 21 historic sites and museums operated by the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission. And I've been working here since about 2015.
Very good. Thank you, Josh.
You're
Again,
welcome.
thank you for having me. I know you're a busy man. You got a lot going on here, but again, thank you.
Right.
So before we get into the museum, which there is a lot of cool stuff here, just want to kind of talk about our lumber heritage in general. I guess technically you could say the lumbering goes back to the 1700s, but in the form we're talking about today, probably mid-1800s till early 1900s when a lot of our forests were completely depleted.
Right, yeah, we talk about lumbering as one aspect of human beings and how we interact with the forest over time. So we take that story all the way back to native Pennsylvanians, Native Americans, the first inhabitants here. And then yes, we go through the height of what is commonly understood as Pennsylvania's lumber boom, when our lumber industry was going full bore. That would be post-Civil War, 1860s, all the way up to the 1930s or 40s.
Okay.
So obviously a lot happening during that time period, so we have a lot in exhibit talking about that time period, but we bring that history, as history is unfolding every day, bring it all the way up to the present day and talk about how we as people use and interact with the forest today, including Pennsylvania's modern lumber industry.
Very cool. Yeah, and that's a good point. A lot of people don't realize that the lumber industry still is happening in Pennsylvania. Obviously to not the extent that it was years ago, but it's thriving.
Right, most definitely. We're not using, as a nation, as much wood and wood forest products as we did, say, around the turn of the 20th century. But yes, it is definitely still a major part of Pennsylvania's economy and society. So here in Pennsylvania, we have the distinction of being the #1 hardwood lumber producer in the nation. So we grow and produce more hardwood lumber than any other state in the U.S., and we have for about the last 20 or 30 years. So it's a major portion of Pennsylvania's economy, employs millions of people throughout the Commonwealth. So yes, still a very active part of Pennsylvania's fabric as a state.
It's very good. Yeah, a lot of people probably aren't aware of that. Thank you for highlighting that. I do want to kind of jump around ahead real quick to, we talked about the 1920s, 1930s, when the lumber boom kind of, took all our forests. You see pictures from that time, and it's kind of depressing and sad. I mean, you had, beautiful areas such as the northern part of PA that were all forested, and to see these pictures of nothing, all the trees are gone.
Right.
It's kind of inevitable when you have a population expanding from the East Coast slowly westward. That's just part of it, but you see some of these pictures, which we'll show later. It's kind of makes you just stop and think a little bit.
Yeah, it can definitely be a jarring sight, especially if you drive around this part of Pennsylvania today and you will see nothing but forests. So we've definitely had a real yo-yo effect or whiplash in terms of how quickly we depleted the forest and then how we were able to eventually come back to being majority forested in the state of Pennsylvania. Right now, in the Commonwealth, about 60% of our land area is covered in forests. So again, why we produce so much hardwood lumber is because we have a lot of hardwood forests. But yeah, it took some time for the lumber industry to work its way through and clear cut most of our forests. The reason why we're named Pennsylvania, the Sylvania part of that means woods. So Penn, obviously, for William Penn, but Sylvania means woods. When he arrived here in the 1600s, Pennsylvania was estimated to be almost 90 to 95% forested.
Wow.
So forest as far as the eye could see. And in a lot of ways, it was an impediment to the early colonists. They were predominantly agrarian, so they needed fields to grow crops. And you can't do that if there's a forest in your way. So a lot of the early forest was cleared to make way for farm fields. And then when you get into that period post-Civil War, when we're really ramping up production and you start to see a lot of clear cutting and a lot of the state being deforested, our lumber was being sent all over the world. So at that point, you have the Industrial Revolution happening. So we very quickly were able to increase our capacity to process and create lumber and wood products. You also have an explosion in population, so westward expansion. You have people moving across the country, settling different areas that hadn't been inhabited before, different parts of the country where there may not be a ready supply of forests or lumber. So our lumber is being sent to the Midwest, being turned into railroad ties to complete the transcontinental railroad, being turned into ships, to encourage world trade, and in some cases being sent to Europe or South America or other places to do the same thing there. So we really increased our capacity to harvest and our output, the desirability or demand for lumber, before we increased our understanding of how natural succession in the forest works.
Sure.
So early on, there was never enough people here to really push the forest past its capacity to regenerate naturally. But when you start supplying the country and the world with lumber, not just a local market, then we're harvesting faster than the forest can grow back. So we do wind up to a point, in the 1920s or 30s where most of Pennsylvania is clear cut. We dropped down to about 30% forested at that point, and most of it is of an age or composition that's not really useful for much of anything, including industry. Over 100 years with scientific effort and conscious management practices, we have been able to regenerate our forests and regenerate our lumber industry. But with the museum, in terms of understanding that history, what we really want to tell folks is, there's a smarter and a better way to do it than maybe it was done, back at that point.
Absolutely.
So we don't want to tell our children and grandchildren, we had this beautiful forest, but you need to wait 100 years before you can see that. We want to make sure that we have a working forest, a forest that not only supplies lumber and forest products, but also is available for recreation, for wildlife habitat, to clean the water and purify the air. All the things that we rely upon forests to do for us, so that it's a continually renewing resource for us, and that it will be there for our kids and grandkids and so on and so forth down the line.
Very good. Great explanation. Thank you for that. Great explanation. One thing I want to mention, when you have a boom like that, the lumber boom, it brings people from all over because they see an opportunity to make money, and that's how things go. And east of here in Williamsport was kind of the hub of everything. As everything was happening there. They even have what they call Millionaires Row in the city, where all your lumber tycoons built their mansions and lived there for quite a while. And so it's there's so many things that were affected by the lumber industry throughout the Commonwealth. Obviously, we can only talk a little bit today, but I do. Williamsport was very prominent in the whole lumber boom, lumber trade going on, and it made today a third-class city, still going strong. So unfortunately, some things come with coal and railroad, and towns were literally built strictly for that. And then after that business leaves, right, you're left sometimes with nothing. Fortunately, some of the towns that were built for the lumber industry are still going strong, which is a good thing. So,
right.
But go ahead.
No, I mean I can talk about that a bit. Williamsport is most definitely the largest city within the lumber heritage region. So there are 12 defined heritage regions in the state of Pennsylvania. Lumber heritage region is the largest. It touches portions of 15 counties in the north central part of the state. And yes, Williamsport is kind of in the southeast quadrant of that heritage area, but it is by far the most populous place, in what is now also part of the Pennsylvania wilds. So by that very name, wilds, you think of not a lot of people, mostly forests, nature, that sort of thing. And it is an interesting arc. And one thing I like to point out to people is that the way the lumber industry operated has a lot of impacts that can still be seen and observed and felt by the population living here in the lumber heritage region today. So while there's still relatively a lot of people in Williamsport, at that point, yes, there were. At one point, Williamsport was the most millionaires per capita of any place in the United States.
Sure.
And the folks that were running lumber mills and profiting off that industry, building extravagant homes, many of which are still there today. You can take tours of. They're kind of neat to poke your head in and take a look at if you can. But when the lumber industry dried up, those people were okay, but everybody else that was supplying that wealth, that were harvesting the trees, bringing them down the rivers and streams or on the railroads to the mills, operating the mills, shipping them out, all those sorts of things. When we ran out of forest, all those people had to just get up and move and find somewhere else, kind of follow the work. If that's what you knew how to do, you had to go somewhere else where you could work in the lumber industry, and it wasn't Pennsylvania anymore.
Yeah.
So if you look at census data from the federal government, Potter County, where the museum is, at the 1900 census had over 30,000 people living here.
Wow.
And today we only have a little less than 17. So almost double the number of people here 120 years ago as there are today.
Wow.
And all of those folks were, in one way or another, or a lot of them, in one way or another, were wrapped up in the lumber industry. They were working in the woods, they were running a train, they were working in a mill, a paper mill, a chemical wood factory, a tannery, what have you. And when the resource was gone, their livelihood was gone.
Yeah.
So, part of rural poverty and those types of problems that faces this region, the brain drain, loss of, a contracting population, young folks grow up and they don't want to necessarily live here anymore and they move away. All those things are all legacies of how the lumber industry operated. So that's another thing as the museum, we really want to, not gloss over that. We want to talk about the negative as well as the positive, and make sure that, again, that's really where history on any type of platform or scale is most useful, is if we can use it, study it, learn from the past, and then make better informed decisions in the future.
Sure.
So even if we could repeat it, would we do it the same way again? Would we, have 30,000 people here and have the forest gone in a matter of 40 years? Probably not. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
But hopefully, at least in some small way, this museum helps to do that and raise awareness of what happened in the past, tell the story of our forests, the story of the people that were working in them, and hopefully making a better future for those that learn from it.
Sure. Very good. And that, again, good explanation.
Thank you.
So another thing I want to touch on is we talked about the lumber heritage per se.
Yes.
But something else that goes with that this museum does highlight is the CCC program, which I think was amazing. Obviously World War II pretty much cut it short and stopped. There is a modern day version going on, a little different, but the CCC was one of the best creations of the federal government, in my opinion. Not only did it give jobs to people who needed it, but it gave discipline and some type of structure, and it created all these, most of the wonderful outdoor recreation areas that we have today through the DCNR.
Most definitely. And the CCC is something we talk about extensively at the museum because, forest management and restoration is the flip side of the coin of lumber industry and harvesting.
Yep.
So, without the CCC, and the efforts that they put into forest regeneration, fire management, suppression, our lumber industry probably would not have returned as robustly as it has. So it is, and as you mentioned, whenever we give tours or I talk to people about it, the number one thing that people say to me about the Civilian Conservation Corps is, I don't understand why they still don't do that today. And it is, they've done surveys. It is, one of the most, if not the most popular federal government program that was ever created.
Absolutely.
And at the point when it was created, very necessary. So Franklin Roosevelt comes into office in the midst of the Great Depression. At that point, you have about a quarter of working age Americans out of a job. 1 in 4 people can't find work when they want to find work. And Roosevelt comes in under the assumption that if private industry is not capable or too scared to hire and start putting these people back to work, that the federal government is going to find something for them to do. So within his first 100 days of office, he creates work progress administration programs. The Civilian Conservation Corps is one of those. And within the first 6 months, there are operable CCC camps all over the United States. So initially, it was just focused toward veterans of World War I. You had to be a World War I veteran to qualify for the program. They later opened that up to anybody that was unemployed. There were still a few requirements. You had to be between the ages of 18 and 25. You had to be single, you couldn't be married, and you had to have a family. So when you were employed by the CCC, the federal government gave you a uniform. You came to one of the 153 camps that were in the state of Pennsylvania and worked on conservation projects, but you also got 3 square meals a day, and then you were paid $30 a month, with 25 of that sent home directly to your family to help support them and make sure that they would be able to put food on the table during the Great Depression. $5 was retained by the enrollee, but most of their needs were already met then. They had their uniform to wear, they had food, and then a little bit of leisure money at the end of the month. And I said 153 camps. That was how many we had in the state of Pennsylvania. We were second only to the state of California.
Sure.
So we had the most per capita of any state. And yeah, they were able to do a tremendous amount of work. A lot of the state parks that we have in the system today were sort of developed and created. The infrastructure for those, pavilions, places to camp, water systems, incinerators to deal with trash, hiking trails, roads, all sorts of things that, all the infrastructure that was involved in that was a lot of it was created by the CCC. And, we nationwide, there were 2 million men that participated in the program between 1933 and 1942 when it ended. 9 years. Obviously, at our entry into World War II, we were coming out of the Great Depression. Congress didn't reauthorize the program. But over that 9 years, 2 million men and several billion trees nationwide.
Wow.
Of what they planted.
Amazing.
So,
I mean, what they did is, and again, a lot of people don't know it. A lot of the outdoor recreation they, throughout the Commonwealth that they use today, whether it's the lakes, the creeks, the streams that were rerouted, the picnic areas, the hiking trails, and a lot of the fire trails were built by the CCC. And what a great program. And that's the CCC alone you could talk about for hours. And I do know some of the state parks do occasionally put on displays and demonstrations throughout the summer.
Most definitely.
Where the CCC camps were. Some of them are still standing. Some of them have been lost to fire. They're just chopped down for progress. But some of them are still there to see the.
There's a lot of infrastructure that was built by the CCC. So you can be in a picnic pavilion or hike on a trail or that sort of thing that was built by the CCC. Most of the places where they lived, the actual camps, were always meant to be temporary. So there's not too many of those buildings left. A few places around PA where you can still see the camp infrastructure. But the CCC really connected the dots in terms of the Commonwealth's effort at forest management and restoration, which started in earnest really in 1895 and was still sort of developing in the 1930s. But part of their management strategy at that point was purchasing cut-over timberland that lumber companies no longer wanted. They had all the trees; they didn't have any more use for it. And the Commonwealth really decided, well, if we're going to manage this, we need to have control over it, and for that, we need to own it. So they start to rack up all this public space, public land, and then, about the time of the CCC, I think they're sort of coming to this realization that it belongs to everybody in the Commonwealth. How do we get people, citizens in the Commonwealth, to make the most of this resource that we now own? So the CCC really kind of connected publicly owned land with the public, and allowed them to come into those areas and make the most of them and really appreciate a lot of those spaces that we now to this day a lot of people plan their whole summer vacation around a specific state park or lake or what have you, and it's really tremendous that we had that opportunity, had that asset, had those men that were, really took a sense of pride in what they were doing.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of documentary evidence in the museum, in our archives and collections, that really show, it didn't just rebuild the nation's natural infrastructure, it sort of rebuilt the morale
Absolutely.
and idea of the nation itself.
Absolutely.
And there's a couple different sources that will show you how that sort of played into then World War II. A lot of those guys who were in the CCC when the war started rolled right into service in the military in World War II. And they were already used to, the program was administered by the Department of the Army. So while they were in the CCC, they were already used to sort of that militaristic lifestyle, drilling, waking up with revelry, all that kind of stuff. Plus they were in great shape. So they, working all day, and they were in great shape, and they just rolled right into service in World War II. And a lot of them, won the Medal of Honor for different things that they did throughout the service. So there's another book we have in the library that sort of talks about that. All the folks that were in CCC and then were able to win Medal of Honor, or be awarded Medal of Honor, I should say, for the service that they provided while they were in World War II.
Very good. Very cool to know. Yeah, I guess that, for a program that only lasted 9 years, I mean, they got a lot accomplished. So,
Most definitely.
And we're, thank God we're still seeing that today. We're able to use that stuff. So.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what, if it's okay with you, we'll take a tour of the museum, highlight a couple things, talk about some cool stuff you got going on here. And for those of you at home, this is a really cool place. I'm actually excited to go show you some of this stuff. Really nice place here. I know the name, Pennsylvania Lumber Museum, can sound boring, but trust me, if you get up this way, or you want to make an effort to come up this way, this place is definitely worth it. The displays are immaculate. The building is nice. It's great displays outside to go walk around. So if you do get a chance, you'll see what we're talking about. Maybe you can make some summer or winter plans, to come up here. So, all right, Josh.
I'm happy to show it off, Scott. People are always blown away when they walk through the door and see what we have to offer here. So.
I can imagine. Very good. All right, let's go. We'll go take a tour. Show you guys what we got.
All right.
All right, we're here in the display area on the inside part of the museum, and Josh is going to take us on a little tour, just highlight a few select exhibits, and you get a taste of what they got in here.
So we have lots of interesting things in the exhibit here. A few of my favorites are we're going to elaborate upon here directly. One is our section on rafting. So before there was a widespread system of roads in Pennsylvania, our streams and rivers were the superhighways of transportation to get your product from wherever it was, in this case the remote forest, to where it needed to go to be sold. In the case of lumber, that was probably a town along the river that had a mill, or in some cases all the way to a port city where the lumber could be turned into a sailing vessel. So this diorama sort of shows an aspect of what that was like. We have a square timber raft here with two men that are piloting it down the river. You would start in the morning, travel down the river as long as you could, as long as there was daylight. When it got too dark to see, put into the side and snub your raft. You can see there's a little space for sleeping right on the raft. If you were near a town, you could go into a tavern or a guest house and stay the night and then continue on. We have another section of exhibit here that sort of talks about how the logistics of that was done, how you pilot a raft. We have a model raft suite here, which is your steering wheel for your raft. You can use this one at the front and one at the back of the raft to avoid obstacles in the river, bridge abutments, boulders, eddies, anything that's going to prevent you from completing your journey downstream. We have a larger photo mural on the wall that sort of shows what that was like in actuality. So you can see, well, this is just about as big as me, and I can very easily move this back and forth. An actual size raft suite was enough for 2 people to be able to operate one. This raft has 4. 4 at the back and 4 at the front, or 2 at the back and 2 at the front. And if you look over your head, there is an actual size suite that shows just how massive these things were. So you would have had two folks working that to avoid obstacles in the river. It could be, depending how quickly the river was flowing, several days to several weeks' journey. When you got to where the raft was headed, everything was disassembled, the timber was sold, and then the raftsmen walked back to wherever they were from. So the main exhibit at the Lumber Museum has a lot of interactive displays that you can use. This one has you being able to grab an axe, chop a notch in a tree, or work a crosscut saw to saw down the tree. Axes and saws were two of the big tools of the trade that you had to use if you were a Pennsylvania woodhead, someone who was harvesting trees in Pennsylvania, you know, during that lumber boom period, post-Civil War, up into the early 1900s. Double bit axes, those that are sharpened on both sides, are really indicative of Pennsylvania lumber industry. During colonial times, before we were actually a country, most axes were only sharp on one side. And the whole process of falling the tree was done with an axe. So you would notch one side, you would come around the other side and notch the other. During that boom period within Pennsylvania, you really see the crosscut saw coming in as a labor-saving and expediting invention. So you still notch one side the direction you want the tree to fall, and then you come in opposite the notch and two people will saw through. So we've got the big crosscut saws here that show that it's like, most of these are going to be big enough for Pennsylvania trees. Even our white pines, which are some of our biggest trees, aren't going to be much more than 3.5, 4 feet at breast height or toward the bottom there where you would actually be sawing. So a 6 to 8 foot saw would be plenty. Out west in California and Washington State, where you have much larger trees, sometimes you can have 20 or 30 foot long crosscut saws. Don't really see those in Pennsylvania. Another fun tool that we have on display here with the axes and saws are lumber stamps. So outside of those two things, the axes and saws, lumber stamps were probably the most ubiquitous tool on the job site. These are important because this is how you get paid. So once my log is cut and the bark is peeled and it's sent on its way down a stream or loaded onto a rail car to the mill, when it gets there, how do I tell my log from your log from anybody else's log? Each end gets several stamps or wax with one of these large hammers that have a brand that is specific to a timber owner blazoned on the one side. So at the mill they have a registry book and they know whose brand is who. They saw the lumber, they measure it, and then they know how much to pay me as the timber owner. So wildfire is one of the unintended negative consequences of how the lumber industry was operating, the speed at which it was operating in Pennsylvania during that boom time period, 1860s through 1920s. And it's really one of the first issues that the Commonwealth has to confront when it takes on the job of starting to care for, manage, and restore our forests. So fire prevention was a very big part of what was the early predecessor of DCNR. And on the wall here we have a variety of firefighting tools. You'll notice, unlike today, most of these are hand tools, right? So we're cutting fire breaks, we're lighting backfires, we're using water tanks and buckets to try and keep fire from spreading onto uncut timber and really hasten the destruction of forests that could still be productive for lumber industry. Another exhibit that's quite popular with museum goers is our steam-powered circular sawmill. So most of the time when you visit, it's like it is today, just static, and you're able to kind of observe it as it is and read a variety of interpretive panels about what it's like. But it really comes alive 3 times a year when we actually run it. So this type of mill is indicative of the type of mill that would have been common in Pennsylvania between about the 1860s and 1880s with a circular saw blade, as you can see here in front of me. By the 1890s, most mills have transitioned to bandsaw technology, so we've really captured a specific moment in time here. And the events that we have in April, July, and October when we run the mill are some of our most well-attended events because people really, again, gravitate toward this as a piece of history that really comes alive when it's in operation. They have a chance to see how it works. You can smell the sawdust, you can hear the noise, You can talk to the volunteers that are operating the mill and sort of tap their brains about this technology. So if you're coming to visit one of those events, the spring show in April, Bark Peelers Festival in July, or fall show in October is really a great time to visit. So in terms of popular exhibits, I would be remiss if I didn't show you our Shea locomotive. This is a 70-ton geared locomotive that would have been used in the Pennsylvania lumber industry from about the 1880s all the way up through the 1920s and 30s. This is a 3-truck Shea, meaning it has 3 sets of wheels, 3 pistons. Over on that side of the locomotive would have turned a drive shaft that supplied power through a gearing system to each of those wheels. So this is really like one of the world's first all-wheel drive vehicles. And it's the type of invention and mechanical technology that was needed to really provide access to hard-to-reach timber in the steep, mountainous, and sparsely populated regions of Pennsylvania. Without this, you weren't getting loads of logs up over the mountain and down the other side to where the mill was. They would have been stranded in a hard-to-reach valley. So again, with technology, with manpower, with all those factors, we were able to dramatically increase the speed of production in Pennsylvania's lumber industry, and unfortunately, in a relatively short period of time, worked through most of our available forest resources in the Commonwealth. But this is one piece that people who visit the museum really react to. It's fun to be able to put your hands on it, climb up inside of the cab, take a look at the controls, and really get a sense of what life was like for someone that would have been running one of these trains at that time period. So even if you've visited the Lumber Museum before, there's always something new to see. In this case, it is our Eastern Loggers Model Railroad exhibit. It is a 10 by 20 foot HO scale model train display that was donated to the museum in late 2021 and was first exhibited to the public in April of this year, April 2022. It precisely models the Pennsylvania lumber industry during the periods where railroads were being used to transport all of the materials, so about 1880s to 1920s. The Eastern Loggers are a group of over a dozen individuals that worked on creating this beautiful layout over the course of 40 years. They started modeling together in 1981 and put a lot of time and effort into it, which you'll see if you come and have a look at it. So please, join us.
All right, guys, we finished up our tour here at the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum. Again, thanks to Josh for taking time out of his day and showing us around here. Again, the video, I tried to condense it so it wasn't too long and people got bored, but there's all kinds of other cool stuff here to see. Check the website. It has all of the events listed throughout the year, as well as the hours. Make sure the hours can vary depending on the time of year, so if you do plan a visit, make sure you check the website or call first before you plan your trip. Josh, again, awesome. Thank you for doing this. Any final thoughts you want to say before we kind of head out?
No, you're very welcome. We're happy to have you, and hopefully your viewers will come and pay us a visit. that's what we're all about here, is connecting people in the Commonwealth with lumber history. So the more people see it, the more people come and visit. That's a great thing, in my opinion. So
Absolutely.
you're very welcome.
Cool.
Anytime.
Very good. Again, come up to beautiful Potter County up here in God's country, Pennsylvania Lumber Museum. Hey, welcome back. This is our bonus segment. With me, we got Dennis Ringling, who is a retired professor of forestry from the Pennsylvania School of Technology here in Williamsport. So I'm going to give him a quick brief moment to introduce himself, and we'll kind of talk about the modern day forestry, as the previous part of this video was all about the history of the foresting that went on in Pennsylvania up to this point. So Dennis, feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. I'm enjoying my retirement years, but I did spend 42 years teaching forest technology here at the Pennsylvania College of Technology. And I feel very strongly about the environment and what we need to do to get the next generation and the future generations knowledgeable of how connected we are to the environment. And that's why I volunteered my time to talk to you today.
Very good. Well, again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule, and just want to kind of talk about the modern day forestry that we got going on in the Commonwealth. Obviously, with your profession, you have a lot of experience in this stuff. So, and I do want to point out one thing. We picked this spot for a reason. We're going to kind of go back to a history for a split second. The Susquehanna River, you see right behind me. Obviously, back in the lumber boom, mid 1800s through early 1900s, most of the times this river, you wouldn't have saw water. It would have been logs completely all the way. You could have literally walked across to the other side. So a little interesting fact there. But so Dennis, so what do you see? Where do you see the modern day forestry going with? In other words, back in the day when they were doing the boom, we had all the trees wiped out essentially at one point in the Commonwealth. And now there's more stuff in place that keeps it more of on a strict basis of take a tree out, put a tree in kind of thing.
Well, if you're looking at the river, and if you look a little further beyond, picture that mountain, Bald Eagle Mountain there, totally void of trees on both sides. Now that mountain, you go up maybe 1,800, maybe 2,000 feet, there's another mile or two up on top and then back down into the next valley. And it starts in Muncie and it goes all the way down to Lamar, if you're familiar with the lay of the land here. And they logged that totally off. And that's just one of many mountains during the logging boom that was funneling logs into this river. So we're fortunate enough now, 2022 and before, that we have 2 forest tech schools. We live in a state that has 17 million people and 13 million acres of forested land. Most of it belongs to just the consumer. The average parcel is about 50 acres. State parks have about 2.2 million. State forests, another 2, maybe 3 million acres. The rest of it belongs to us. And we need those people to pay attention to how to manage that forest. But even more so than that, we need the next generation of conservationists, preservationists, scientists, biologists, pathologists, engineers, water specialists. There's so many areas where the next generation can get involved with how to take care of this planet. Not just my backyard and your backyard, but this planet. And we need to be cognizant of that. We need people who know how we are so connected to the environment and act on it and come up with ways by which we can coexist. I will be off the planet, you'll be off the planet, but it's my grandchildren and their children that will be dealing with the issues that if we don't take care of what we have now, there's going to be some serious consequences.
Sure.
For example, water is going to be the biggest issue planet-wise.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Planet-wise, water will be an issue. And we need scientists, engineers, dealing just with that commodity.
Yeah, understandable. I mean, it is a serious issue. Now, along with that, do you see, you started teaching in the 70s, if I remember correctly? So, was there more of an interest in this stuff back then as opposed to today, or is it kind of the same?
Forestry as a science, which I consider to be like the first ecology, after we learned our lessons of logging extensively the eastern seaboard, and then we started thinking about conservation and preservation as we moved out west. Of course, a lot of our lumber went out west to build. We were part of the industrialization of this country. We learned that we could not continue out west with the Rocky Mountains, etc., with what we did here in the east. And that was really the start of conservation. I said earlier that we have 2 forest tech schools in Pennsylvania and 1 major university that is diversifying from straight forestry when I took up the profession to a more all-encompassing environmental aspect, which
Makes
I
sense.
strongly suggest that we do worldwide.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I said, I cannot work, when I did work with my career with just a tree, I had to think about water, wildlife, and lots of other things that most people are not even aware of.
Sure. Do you miss it? Do you miss teaching?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time hiking. I spend a lot of time outside, and I do miss imparting to that generation a lot of the science. And I've seen graduates that are now in very responsible positions, so it is rewarding. Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. Do you serve on any kind of panels or boards or committees or anything for forestation?
I am a vice chair for our conservancy here in the greater Williamsport area.
Okay.
It's and soon to be chair, so I'm taking my interests and taking it to the next step
Very good.
in my retirement.
Yeah. Well, you still got a while to go. So keep giving your knowledge out there, and hopefully somebody picks it up and runs with it into the future.
The North Central Pennsylvania Conservancy is a small group, but we have 16 counties that we like to work with. So I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah.
We like to keep the water running clean, and we like to keep the farms that want to stay farming, and naturally the woodlots as well.
Very good. Good, very good. Do you so you do see you saw a change in the way forestation is taught with the additional
Absolutely.
But I mean, is there what would you say to somebody young who's considering a career possibly in forestry? What would you say to them to kind of convince them to go full speed?
Well, it's very science-based and people-based. To get to the timber, and remember, 80% or so of our forested resources is owned by the consumer, by mom and dad and those types. It's not the state, it's not federal, it's not the county. So we want those people knowledgeable about. And most of the landowners are not interested in, which is a good thing, not interested in cutting their trees for money. I think one of the biggest services that their lands provide would be bird watching.
Yeah.
And wildlife, just observation, not so much for hunting, and just taking a walk in the woods. So from that standpoint, from the beginnings of my career, it was more how much money is standing in timber on the property.
Right.
And at the end of my career, I see more emphasis, which is a good sign of I'm more interested in wildlife, clean water, bird watching, just enjoying the aesthetics of my woodlot.
Absolutely. Yesterday we touched a bit about how fortunate we are to have a very strong state park and state forest system in the Commonwealth that provides the camping, the kayaking, the fishing opportunities.
I think I shared with you the stat another time where I think we're the only state in the lower 48 that can claim this, where we have 121 state parks.
Yeah, I believe you're
And
right.
we have 17 million people. And within 30 minutes of wherever you live in this Commonwealth, you have 3 to 4 state parks to drive to within 30 minutes.
Yep.
And I don't think another state can claim that.
Probably not. I know I do. I've been around quite a bit, and I've always been very impressed with our state parks. I'm very proud of it. You know.
So Penn's Woods, Pennsylvania, Latin, for Pennsylvania would be Latin for wood.
Yep.
But Penn's Woods, there's something to be said for what we have here.
Absolutely.
Now, Maine has 90% plus, but they don't have forested, but they don't have the population.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Dennis, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. I learned a lot from you, and you're obviously very well respected in your profession.
One thing I want to add,
Sure.
what is different now with forestry and the environment would be the amount of technology that has come. We're using
Oh, yeah.
drones, and GPS, GIS is relatively, well, it's not new anymore. We have it on our phones, and then we have LiDAR. We have all of this new technology that makes managing that mountainside that much more interesting.
Oh, absolutely. The drones alone is,
Right.
that's a huge asset
And
for.
if you like drones, you can become an expert in it and it's tied up with the environment.
Good point. Yeah. So there's many different avenues, many different interests that could come together to have a career in
And we all
forestry.
need to work together.
Absolutely.
Once again, thank you for having me there. I'm not sure if I added to your
This was great. This is a great location, and
seminar, but
yeah,
we are fortunate.
very fortunate. Well, there you have it. If anybody's interested at home about a career in forestry, check out the Pennsylvania School of Technology. There's different avenues that you can pursue with it. Many different things you can tie into a career in forestry. So, again, Dennis Ringling, very knowledgeable, and thankful he was able to sit down with us and have a little chat. So I'll post a link in the post for the school if you're interested in checking out what programs are available. So thanks for watching.